A greedy nephew took the widow's cash. Hell's angels made him serve her table. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. You promised you'd fix my heater with last week's money, Tommy. I'm freezing at night. Clara Whitcomb kept her voice low, but the words still reached the next booth, where two long-haul drivers paused over their plates. Her cardigan hung open, where one brown button had torn loose, and both of her thin white hands stayed wrapped around a free glass of water, as if the little warmth from the diner air could pass through the glass and into her bones. Tommy leaned across the table, one thick finger already near the corner of her worn coin purse, his steak and eggs, bacon, pancakes, and endless coffee refills spread in front of him like he had earned every bite. Just give me the cash, Aunt Clara, he said, glancing at the $18.74 check beside his plate. I'll handle it after breakfast. The aisle behind him darkened before Clara could answer. Steel-toe boots moved. Over the narrow diner floor, long shadows crossed the cracked white tiles, and the smell of road dust and machine oil cut through the burnt coffee hanging over the room. Mason Blackglass Pike stopped at the end of their table. He was 59, white, broad through the shoulders, gray-bearded, with a weathered denim Hell's Angels-style cut over a black thermal shirt and a pale scar running from the corner of his left eye toward his cheekbone. His eyes were colder than the morning outside, not empty, just sharp enough to see through a man before the man finished lying. Three biker brothers came in behind him, without taking a word from him. One stood near the front door, arms folded over a patched leather vest. One took the gap beside the pay counter, his boots planted 6 inches from the brass footrail. The third moved quietly to the short hallway near the restrooms, blocking the only back way out. The diner was packed tight, with grown men and women finishing the early run, truckers in insulated jackets, a road crew foreman, with orange gloves tucked into his belt, a waitress refilling mugs under a heat lamp. No one in that place looked under 18. Outside the front glass, the thermometer taped beside the open sign showed 29 degrees Fahrenheit, and the parking lot lights shone over pickup hoods, diesel caps, and frost along the curb. Tommy turned halfway, saw the bikers, and tried to make his face hard. This is family business, he said. Mason looked at Clara first, not Tommy. He noticed the free water, the untouched sugar packets in her saucer, the way she kept her purse trapped under one elbow like a bird protecting its last egg. Then he looked at Tommy's full plate and the folded cash half pulled from Clara's purse. Family business, Mason repeated, his voice flat. He reached down, not touching Tommy, and slid the diner check into the center of the table with 2 fingers. The 3 brothers did not move. They did not need to. Tommy's hand slowly came off Clara's purse. The room did not burst into panic. It tightened, inch by inch, the way a strap tightens over a load before a long haul. Clara kept her eyes on the glass in her hands, ashamed that strangers had heard the heater, the money, the begging hidden inside a Friday breakfast she had never wanted. Tommy pushed his chair back only half an inch, then stopped when the biker near the front door shifted his weight, without saying a word. The waitress behind the counter, a white woman in her late 50s, with tired eyes and a pencil tucked above one ear, held a coffee pot in midair and watched Mason read the table like a ledger. There was the $18.74 check. There were 2 strips of bacon left on Tommy's plate, a square of butter melting into pancakes, and a steak cut in half, but not finished. In front of Clara sat no food at all, only the free water, the bent paper napkin she had folded into quarters, and a small coin purse, with the vinyl rubbed pale along the seams. Mason lowered himself into the empty space at the end of the booth, without crowding Clara. He did not look at the bikers behind him. They already knew their work. The man at the door kept the cold from spilling too far into the diner whenever someone came in. The man by the pay counter blocked the narrow path to the register. The man near the hallway stood still beside a framed menu board advertising 2 eggs and toast for $5.99 before 7 a.m. Tommy tried to laugh it off, but it came out thin and dry. My aunt gets confused, he said. She worries over little things. Mason's cold eyes moved to Clara's cardigan, where the missing button had left the fabric gaping over a faded blouse. Heat is not a little thing at 29 degrees Fahrenheit, he said. Tommy swallowed and put one hand flat on the table, as if he owned it. I told her I was handling it. Mason turned the check, so the numbers faced Tommy. With last week's money, it was not a question. Clara finally lifted her head. He said the furnace man needed cash first, she said, barely above the diner noise. I gave him $80 last Friday. The week before that, $45. Before that, my grocery money. A road crew foreman at the counter looked down at his own plate. One of the truckers set his fork beside his hash browns. Tommy's jaw tightened. She forgets what she spends. Mason's fingers rested beside the check, scarred knuckles still, nails clean except for dark traces of machine work. Then show the receipt. Tommy blinked. For the first time, the space around him seemed smaller than the booth. The burnt coffee smell thickened under the heat lamps, mixing with diesel and wet wool from the packed diner. Clara's hands trembled around the glass, but she did not speak for him. Mason waited. So did every adult close enough to hear. Tommy looked toward the register, as if numbers there might save him, but the waitress, with the pencil above her ear, had already set down the coffee pot and was watching his hands. Her name tag read Nadine, and the red plastic had been scratched by years of breakfast rushes. Receipt, Mason said again, not louder, only clearer. Tommy reached into his jacket slowly, making a show of patience, and pulled out a folded wad of papers mixed with cash. He placed it on the table, as if proving something, but the first slip that slid loose was not from a furnace company. It was a parking receipt from the mall outside Cedar Falls, stamped Thursday for 12 p.m. $12.00 paid. The next was a clothing store slip for a new winter coat, size large, $79.95 before tax. Clara stared at it without blinking. Mason did not touch the papers. He let Tommy expose them himself. That was my own money, Tommy said. I work. Nadine stepped closer, keeping one hand on the edge of the counter. You were in here last Friday too, she said. Same booth. Same order. She had tea that went cold because you told her not to spend extra. Tommy turned on her, face reddening under the diner lights. Stay out of it. The biker brother by the pay counter turned his head. That was all. Tommy's shoulders tightened, as if the room had moved 1 foot closer. Clara's voice came through small but steady. He told me the furnace man was coming Monday. I stayed home all day with my coat on. She swallowed and looked at the glass in her hands. I kept the oven door closed because the fire department flyer said not to heat the house that way. I just sat by the kitchen table. Mason's eyes shifted from her to Tommy, cold and exact. How far is the house? 3 miles, Clara said. Past the grain elevator, white porch, blue mailbox. And the furnace man? Mason asked. Tommy pushed the clothing receipt under his palm. He never answered. Name? Tommy said nothing. Around them, grown customers pretended not to stare and failed. A woman in a quilted coat stopped tearing open a sugar packet. A trucker with a frost-white beard set both hands around his mug and looked at Clara's missing button instead of Tommy's plate. Mason lifted the $18.74 check and placed it beside the coat receipt. 2 pieces of paper. 2 truths. Tommy had eaten hot food, while Clara carried cold air in her sweater. He had bought warmth for himself, with money promised to her house. Nadine walked to the bulletin board near the pie case and took down a local furnace repair card pinned under a magnet from an auto parts store. This man answers early calls, she said. He fixed our pilot line last January. Mason nodded once, then looked back at Tommy. So the problem was never finding help. Tommy's mouth opened, but no useful words came out. Mason reached toward Clara's coin purse only, after she loosened her grip and gave him permission with a tiny nod. He slid the folded bills Tommy had half pulled free back toward her side of the table. Then he placed his own hand flat beside them, scarred knuckles resting on cracked laminate, a quiet border Tommy would not cross. Tommy stared at Mason's hand, as if the scarred knuckles were a locked gate. The folded bill stayed on Clara's side of the table, close enough for her to reach, no longer trapped under Tommy's finger. She did not take them at first. Shame had kept her still longer than cold ever had. Mason waited until she lifted one trembling hand from the water glass and covered the money herself. Only then did he move. He pulled the diner check closer, looked at the number, and took a small canvas pouch from the inside pocket of his denim cut. It was the kind of pouch a rider kept for tolls, laundromats, and old parking meters across county roads, where card readers froze in bad weather. He opened it, over the table, and began stacking quarters, dimes, and nickels beside the $18.74 check. No drama, just payment. Tommy's face twisted with insult, not guilt. You think tossing coins around makes you in charge? He asked. Mason kept counting until the stacks came even, then added a $1 bill for Nadine's tip and another $5 for the kitchen. Clara looked at the coins, as if they weighed more than money. They were a line between what had been taken from her and what would no longer be taken. Around the booth, the diner stayed crowded but controlled. The road crew foreman turned his orange gloves over in his hands. A white-haired trucker in a brown insulated coat pushed his plate aside and watched Tommy without blinking. Nadine set a clean mug near Clara, but did not interrupt. Mason finally looked up. She keeps her cash. For words. Tommy leaned back, trying to recover the shape of his usual power. She's my aunt. She needs someone to look after things. Mason's cold eyes moved over the new coat receipt, the mall parking slip, the full plate, and Clara's missing button. Looking after things does not leave a 73-year-old widow cold in her own kitchen. Tommy's mouth tightened. You do not know our family. Clara flinched at the word, and Mason saw it. He saw how that word had been used like a padlock, locking her into silence every Friday morning, while a grown man ate hot food with her heater money. Mason slid the clothing receipt away from the cash and placed it beside Tommy's plate. The message was clean enough for everyone to read. Tommy pushed himself halfway out of the booth. I'm done here. The brother by the front door did not step forward. He simply remained where he was, wide shoulders filling the glass-lit exit, with the 29 degrees Fahrenheit morning beyond him. The brother by the pay counter folded his arms across his leather vest and held the narrow aisle without speaking. The third brother near the restroom hallway kept his boots planted beside the menu board, cutting off the last route through the back. Tommy's eyes moved from one man to the next, searching for a gap that was not there. No one touched him. No one had to. Mason stood, reached behind the counter rail, and took the white diner apron Nadine offered, with a small nod. He placed it over the back of Tommy's chair. You ate on her money, Mason said. Now you serve her table. Tommy looked at the apron, as if it were something dirty left in the road. For years, Friday morning had taught him one easy rule. Clara would lower her eyes, open the coin purse, and pay whatever it cost to make him leave before the diner noticed her shame. That rule was gone now. Mason stood beside the booth, one hand resting near the stacked coins, his gray beard still, his scar pale under the fluorescent light. He did not raise his voice. He did not need a second sentence. Nadine took the apron from the chair back, unfolded it, and held it out by the neck strap. Employees only behind the counter, she said, calm and practical. But he can clear his own mess, carry a clean mug, and bring food from the pass. I'll watch him. Tommy looked to the door. The biker there remained in place, a white man in his early 60s, with a square jaw, a faded road tattoo on the side of his neck, and hands folded over his vest. He said nothing. Tommy looked toward the pay counter. The second brother stood beside the gum rack, and the register, broad and silent, eyes steady under a black knit cap. Tommy looked toward the restroom hallway. The third biker, leaner and older, kept the back path closed, with the patience of a locked service gate. The packed diner had become a room of adult witnesses. Nobody smiled. Nobody cheered. That made it worse. Mason lifted the apron by 2 fingers and placed it against Tommy's chest. Tie it. Tommy's cheeks reddened, but his hands obeyed. The white apron sat over his winter jacket, crooked at first, then tighter when Nadine pointed to the side strings. Clara tried to speak, but Mason gave her a small shake of the head, not harsh, only protective. This was not hers to soften. Tommy had made her cold. Tommy would learn the weight of a warm table. Nadine set a gray bus tub on the edge of the booth and nodded to the plates. Start there. Tommy's jaw worked as he lifted his own greasy plate, the steak knife resting beside the half-finished eggs, the pancake syrup drying along the rim. He had carried nothing for Clara in weeks, maybe months, yet now every step across the narrow aisle felt measured by the eyes around him. A trucker moved his elbows in to give room. The road crew foreman pulled his orange gloves off the counter. Tommy placed the plate into the tub, then returned for the bacon saucer, the coffee cup, the extra syrup, the butter wrapper, and the crumpled napkins he had tossed beside Clara's untouched water. Mason pointed once to the tabletop. Nadine handed Tommy a damp towel. He wiped the laminate in slow passes until the sticky ring from his coffee was gone. Clean, Mason said. Tommy wiped again. Clara sat rigid in the booth, the folded bills under her palm, and the free glass of water between both hands. The diner's burnt coffee smell still hung under the heat lamps, but now another smell rose from the kitchen: oatmeal, toast, and eggs on a flat-top grill. Nadine wrote the order herself and clipped it at the pass. Mason counted out another few dollars from his pouch, placed them beside the first stack of coins, and looked at Tommy. Hot water first. Tommy took a clean mug from Nadine, filled it where she told him, and carried it back with both hands, careful not to spill on the cracked white tile. He set it before Clara. For the first time, that morning, something warm on that table belonged to her. Tommy kept both hands around the hot mug until Nadine pointed to the empty space beside Clara's water glass. He set it there, with care he had never shown her coin purse. Clara looked at the steamless surface of her old water, then at the new mug, and for a moment she seemed unsure whether she was allowed to touch it. Mason saw the hesitation and moved nothing except his eyes. The permission was already on the table, paid for in quarters, dimes, and the kind of silence Tommy could not argue with. Clara wrapped both hands around the mug, and color slowly came back into her fingers. Nadine returned to the pass, where the cook, a heavy white man in his 40s, with a flour-stained apron and a tattooed forearm, slid a plain breakfast plate under the heat lamp. Oatmeal in a white bowl, 2 eggs over medium, buttered toast cut corner to corner. A small cup of strawberry jam. Simple food, but hot, honest, and meant for her. The ticket beside it read $7.49, senior breakfast, paid. Mason tapped 2 fingers on the edge of the table once, not for noise, only to draw Tommy's eyes. Serve it right. Tommy's face hardened, but he moved. Nadine stopped him before he reached over the counter line and pointed to the side shelf. Tray, napkin, clean spoon. He took the brown plastic tray, set a paper napkin flat, placed the spoon beside the bowl, then added the plate under her watch. The aisle was narrow, barely 3 feet between booth and counter, and every step forced him past the people who had watched him spend his aunt's heater money on himself. The biker at the door never shifted. The brother by the register kept his hands folded at his belt. The third stood near the hallway, with his chin low and his eyes on Tommy's tray. None of them spoke. Tommy reached the booth and lowered the food in front of Clara. The toast sat too far to the side. Mason looked at it. Tommy adjusted the plate. The spoon faced the wrong way. Nadine did not speak. She only looked down at it. Tommy turned the spoon so Clara could reach it with her right hand. Clara's lips pressed together, not from fear now, but from the effort of staying composed in front of a diner full of adults who had finally seen what Friday mornings had become. Mason slid the cold glass of free water away and set the hot mug closer. Eat while it is warm, he said. That was all. Clara picked up the spoon. Her hand shook once, then steadied. The first bite of oatmeal seemed to take her longer than the whole argument had taken Tommy. He stood beside the booth in the crooked apron, waiting to be dismissed like a man who had mistaken humiliation for punishment. Mason did not let him have that easy exit. He pointed to the table edge, where syrup had dried in a brown streak. Tommy wiped it again. He pointed to the floor beneath the booth, where Tommy's paper straw wrapper had fallen near Clara's shoe. Tommy bent, picked it up, and placed it in the bus tub. Then Mason nodded toward the coffee pot in Nadine's hand. Tommy took the fresh mug she gave him and set it beside Clara's plate, leaving enough room for her purse and the folded bills under her palm. Clara looked up at her nephew for the first time without pleading. He looked away first. Clara ate slowly, spoon by spoon, as if her body had forgotten that breakfast could arrive without a debt attached to it. Mason stayed standing beside the booth, not watching her mouth, not making a scene of her hunger, only keeping his cold eyes on the man in the apron. Tommy shifted his weight in the narrow aisle, trapped between the full diner and the silent wall of bikers who had turned his usual Friday escape into a service shift. Nadine set the furnace repair card on the table beside Mason's coin stacks. The card was bent at one corner and read Harlan County Heat and Furnace, 24-hour service, with a local number handwritten in black marker beneath the printed line. Mason picked up the card, looked once at Clara, and asked, "You own the house?" Clara nodded. "My husband paid it off before he passed. Small place, 900 square feet. Furnace is older than my Buick." Mason placed the card by her purse, not by Tommy. "Then the call is yours." Mason took a $20 bill and another 20 from his pouch, flattened them beside the paid breakfast ticket, and slid them to Nadine. "Put this in an envelope with her name on it. Hand it to the furnace man when he gets here, not to Tommy." Nadine understood without extra explanation. She reached for the diner phone mounted near the pie case and dialed while the cook kept working behind the pass. Tommy started to say something about being late, but Mason turned his head a few inches, and the words collapsed before becoming useful. The brother by the register stepped aside only enough for a trucker to reach the counter and pay for his own meal. After that, the gap closed again. The brother at the front door held his place under the open sign, frost glowing beyond the glass. The third brother near the hallway lowered his hands to his belt and kept watching Tommy's apron strings hang unevenly against his jacket. Nadine spoke into the phone, gave Clara's address past the grain elevator, repeated blue mailbox, white porch, and asked for the earliest visit. She listened, wrote on the back of the diner check, and brought it over. "He can be there before noon," she said. "Diagnostic is $40. Parts separate." He said no cash handoff through relatives. Mason gave Clara the written time. Clara held it like a prescription that might actually be filled. A road crew foreman at the counter leaned over and pushed a pencil toward her. "Write your number there, ma'am. My wife keeps a list of county senior heating grants at the church office. All adults. No strings." Clara hesitated, then wrote with small, careful letters. Tommy stared at the floor. Mason pointed to the empty coffee cup near Clara's plate. Tommy took it, carried it to Nadine, got a refill under her eye, and returned it, with the handle facing Clara's right hand. The work was small. That was why it hurt him. He had spent weeks turning her needs into errands he never ran. Now every adult in the diner watched him complete one simple task correctly. Tommy tried to turn the refill into an ending. He placed the mug down, with the handle facing Clara, stepped back from the booth, and reached behind his neck for the apron string, as if the room had already released him. Mason's hand rose only a few inches, palm down, and Tommy stopped. The three brothers held their places, without changing expression. The front door remained covered by the broad rider under the open sign. The pay counter remained guarded by the biker in the black knit cap. The back hallway remained closed by the lean older rider, whose boots had not left the same two cracked floor tiles since the moment he arrived. The diner understood before Tommy did. Service was not finished when the plate arrived. It was finished when Clara was treated like the person at the center of the table. Mason took the blank guest check pad Nadine offered and placed one sheet beside Tommy's hand. Then he set the mall parking receipt and the winter coat receipt above it, aligned with the edge of the table like evidence in a county office. "Write it plain," Mason said. Tommy looked at Clara, hoping she would rescue him from the shame he had built for himself. She did not. Her spoon rested beside the oatmeal bowl, and her hands stayed around the hot mug. She was still small in that booth, cardigan missing a button, shoulders narrow under worn yarn, but the folded bills were under her palm now. They were no longer in his reach. Tommy picked up Nadine's pencil. His first words came out slanted and messy, so Mason turned the paper back toward him. Readable. Tommy pressed harder. I will not take Clara Whitcomb's benefit cash. I will not handle furnace money. I will not order food for her to pay. He stopped there, jaw tight. Mason pointed to the bottom line. Tommy added his name, Tommy Rusk, and the date, Friday, 6:38 a.m. Nadine signed as witness. The road crew foreman signed beneath her, with a work-rough hand. It was not a courtroom. It was a diner full of adults who would remember. Mason slid the paper to Clara, not to himself. Yours. Clara folded it once and tucked it into the side pocket of her coin purse. Tommy reached for his jacket pocket, then froze under Mason's stare. Slowly, he took out the cash he had kept folded behind the clothing receipt. 20s, a 10, and 5 worn singles. Mason separated $80 and $45 into 2 stacks, the amounts Clara had named, then looked at the remaining bills. Tommy pushed 2 more 20s forward without being told. Grocery money. Clara's eyes lowered to the table, but this time not from shame. The money returned to her in pieces, like boards put back into a broken porch step. Nadine brought a small paper bag with 2 wrapped slices of toast and a covered cup of oatmeal for later. Mason paid for that too, leaving another $3 beside the register slip. Tommy started to remove the apron again. Mason nodded toward the bus tub. Tommy carried it to the service station, emptied the dirty dishes, where Nadine pointed, wiped the tray, washed his hands at the small sink under her supervision, then came back and stood beside his aunt's booth, with the apron still on. Tell her what the breakfast is, Mason said. Tommy's throat worked before the words came. It is yours, Aunt Clara, not mine. I should have paid for my own. Mason did not ask for tears. Clara did not give him forgiveness as a performance. She only lifted her mug, took a careful drink, and went back to her eggs, while every adult in that narrow diner let the silence hold Tommy in place. Tommy stood in the crooked apron until Clara finished enough of the eggs for Nadine to stop watching the plate, with worry in her eyes. Mason gave no speech. He reached for the signed paper only long enough to make sure Clara had tucked it inside her coin purse, then pushed the returned cash closer to her wrist, where Tommy could see it and not reach it. The bills lay in 3 clean stacks, the $80 for the first false repair, the $45 from the week before, and the grocery money he had kept behind the clothing receipt. Clara counted it once, with careful fingers, then folded it into the zippered pocket. She did not thank Tommy. That mattered. Nadine brought a small safety pin from the drawer under the register and set it beside the torn button on Clara's cardigan. Clara worked the pin through the tired brown yarn, closing the gap at her chest, while the diner returned to its early rhythm around her. Coffee cups were filled. Drivers settled checks. The road crew foreman tore a corner from his receipt and wrote the church office number in block letters, then slid it to Clara without standing over her. Mason watched the furnace card on the table, the noon appointment written on the back of the paid diner check, and the $40 inspection fee already held behind the counter in Nadine's envelope. Practical things. Real things. Tommy looked smaller with every one of them. Mason finally turned to him. Apron. Tommy untied it, folded it badly, then corrected the fold when Nadine pointed at the hook near the service station. He hung it there, wiped both hands on his own jacket instead of the diner linen, and stepped toward the front. The brother at the door opened a gap just wide enough for one grown man to pass. The other 2 bikers stayed where they were until Tommy crossed the threshold into the 29 degrees Fahrenheit morning, carrying no cash that belonged to Clara and no excuse that would survive the people inside. Through the window, he stood beside his car for a moment, shoulders high against the cold, then got in and pulled out of the frosted lot without looking back. Mason did not follow him. He sat across from Clara only after she nodded that it was all right. For the first time that morning, the booth had room for her. He placed the furnace card, the grant number, and the paid breakfast ticket in a straight line beside her purse. Driver can take you home when you are ready, he said, nodding toward the foreman, who had already offered a ride after his crew meeting. Or we can wait. Clara looked at the oatmeal cup packed for later, the money in her purse, the hot mug under her hands, and the clean table in front of her. "I'll finish breakfast first," she said. Mason gave one small nod and stood. His brothers moved, with him, quiet and orderly, leaving the aisles open again. Nadine topped off Clara's mug and placed the covered oatmeal bag beside her elbow. Outside the glass, the bikers crossed the pale morning lot in a line, their shadows sliding over frost while Clara stayed by the window, with both hands wrapped around the warm cup. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.